What if the most powerful man in New York fell for a stranger? Without knowing she's the wife he could never forget. One forbidden night. A kiss that shouldn't have happened. Two broken hearts meeting in the dark, starving for something they believed was lost forever. He wants her like he's never wanted anyone. She runs but can't resist, and when the truth comes out, it'll be too late to turn back. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel, leave a like and become a member for early access to upcoming stories. And if you felt it was truly worth listening to, hit the super thanks button too. Your support makes all the difference and helps us keep bringing stories that move you. The storm crashed down on New York like divine punishment. The dark sky vomited lightning that tore through the darkness, and the wind howled between the skyscrapers like an enraged ghost. The streets glistened wet, reflecting the neon lights of taxis racing desperately for shelter. The smell of wet asphalt mixed with the coffee aroma from cafes still stubbornly open, creating that unique atmosphere only Manhattan can offer on stormy nights. Ivy Harper, now professionally known as Evelyn Blake, was exhausted. Her feet ached inside the heels she'd insisted on wearing to the corporate event. The navy blue dress clung to her damp skin, heavy from the rain that had caught her off guard, rushing from the hotel to the taxi, and then from the taxi back to the hotel. Her brown hair, normally pulled back in an elegant bun, now fell in rebellious strands over her shoulders, dripping cold drops that ran down her back. She'd been in New York for 3 days for an interior design fair, 3 days of forced smiles, calculated handshakes, and empty conversations with potential clients. All she wanted was to get to her room, peel off these soaked clothes, take a hot shower, and disappear between the soft sheets of the king-size bed. The hotel elevator was mirrored and silent. Ivy watched her reflection as she rode up. Subtle dark circles, slightly chapped lips, makeup smudged at the corners of her eyes. She didn't recognize herself anymore. 3 years ago, she was a different person. 3 years ago, she had a different last name. Whitman. A name she'd buried along with the wreckage of a marriage that should never have ended the way it did. But this wasn't the time to think about that. Not now. The 12th floor hallway was empty and smelled of artificial lavender, that generic perfume of expensive hotels trying to seem welcoming but only managing to be impersonal. Ivy pulled the keycard from her purse, checked the number on the door, 1247, and slid the card into the lock. The green light blinked. The door unlocked with a soft click. She walked in and froze. The suite was dark but not empty. A male silhouette stood near the panoramic window, back to the door, watching the storm outside. Lightning illuminated his profile in intermittent flashes, broad shoulders, upright posture, a glass of whiskey in his right hand. The scent of wood and spices hung in the air, mixed with something she couldn't identify. Ambition, perhaps. Power. The man turned slowly. His eyes met hers. And the world stopped. Henry Whitman. No, it couldn't be. Not him, not here, not now. But it was. Those grey-blue eyes she knew so well. That defined jawline, the stubble he always let grow when he was tired, the lips she'd kissed 1,000 times, the small scar above his left eyebrow, inherited from a childhood bicycle fall. 3 years. 3 years since she'd walked out of their apartment with just a suitcase and a shattered heart. 3 years since the last time she'd seen him, at the law office, signing papers that were never finalized. He didn't recognize her, and for a second, just 1 second, that hurt more than anything. "You're in the wrong place," he said, his voice deep and hoarse, heavy with exhaustion. There was no irritation in his tone, just curiosity, as if she were a puzzle he didn't expect to solve that night. Ivy should have left. Should have mumbled an apology, checked the room number again and disappeared down the hallway. But her feet didn't move. Her heart pounded so loud she was sure he could hear it. Maybe at the right time, she heard her own voice respond, soft and dangerously calm. Where did that come from? She didn't know. But the words hung between them like an involuntary confession. Henry tilted his head, his eyes studying every inch of her. He took a step forward, and the lamp beside the couch finally illuminated his face completely. He was older, more tired, but still devastatingly handsome. Still his. "You're soaked," he observed, and there was something almost tender in the way he said it, as if he cared, as if she weren't a stranger invading his space. Ivy looked down. Her arms were covered in goosebumps, and small puddles of water formed around her shoes. She must have looked pathetic, but strangely, she didn't feel that way, not under his gaze. "The storm caught me by surprise," she murmured, and hated how fragile her voice sounded. Henry took another step, and another, until he was close enough for her to feel the warmth of his body. He smelled of whiskey, rain, and something familiar, something she wouldn't let her mind name. "You should get out of those clothes," he said, and the silence that followed was charged with a tension neither of them expected. His eyes landed on her lips. Ivy held her breath. I will," she whispered, but didn't move. Neither of them moved. The storm outside continued raging, but inside that suite, the only sound was their breathing, uneven, heavy, dangerously synchronized. Henry raised his hand slowly, like someone approaching a frightened animal. His fingers brushed the wet strand of hair falling over her face, pushing it back with a gentleness that made her knees weak. "You," he began, his voice faltering. "You seem familiar to me, because I'm yours." Ivy wanted to scream, "Because you know me, because you once loved me." But she said nothing, just looked into those grey eyes and felt the pain of 3 years crashing down on her like a wave. "Maybe," she whispered. "We've met before, in another life." His lips curved into a half smile. "Sad, tired, lonely, maybe," he repeated. And then, without warning, his hand slid along the side of her face. His thumb caressed the line of her jaw. Ivy closed her eyes, unable to resist the touch her body still recognized as home. "You're shaking," he murmured, his mouth so close to her ear she could feel the warmth of his breath on her skin. "It's not from the cold," she confessed, before she could stop herself. When Ivy opened her eyes, Henry was looking at her as if seeing something sacred, something he'd lost and never expected to find again. He leaned in, slowly. So slowly that she had 1,000 chances to pull away. But she didn't pull away. His lips brushed hers, and a ghost of a touch, an unfulfilled promise. Ivy tasted whiskey and regret, felt the world collapse and rebuild itself in the space of a second. And then, as if waking from a trance, she pulled back, breathless, scared, alive. I need to go," she whispered, her voice breaking. Henry didn't hold her, didn't beg, just stood there, with that lost look, as if she were taking something from him. "Who are you?" he asked, and there was desperation in that question. Ivy smiled, a sad smile. "Broken. True. Someone you've already met," she answered, and left, leaving Henry Whitman alone in the darkness, with the taste of a kiss that almost happened, and the feeling that he just let something essential slip away. Outside, in the empty hallway, Ivy leaned against the wall and brought her hand to her chest, her heart still racing, her lips still tingling. What did I just do? But deep down, she knew. She just opened a door that should have remained locked forever, and now there was no turning back. The coffee at Henry Whitman's office tasted like ashes. He sat behind the solid mahogany desk, eyes fixed on the espresso cup cooling between his fingers, but his mind was miles away, trapped in a hotel suite, in an almost kiss, in a pair of brown eyes that had haunted him for 3 nights straight. The room smelled of leather and fresh paper, with a subtle hint of cedar from the diffuser in the corner. The walls were covered with shelves full of business books he'd never completely read, and awards that didn't mean anything anymore. Morning light streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, bathing Manhattan in golden tones, but Henry saw no beauty in it, only emptiness. 3 years. 3 years since Ivy had left his life like a ghost. 3 years since he'd signed the divorce papers that, for some bureaucratic reason, were never finalized. 3 years since he'd lost the only person who'd made him feel something beyond ambition. He believed she hated him, that she'd disappeared because he didn't know how to love her the right way, because he worked too much, because he put the company above everything, because in the end he'd chosen power over her. And now a stranger invaded his thoughts with the same intensity, that Ivy had once invaded his heart. Someone you've already met. Her words echoed in his mind like a curse. The office door opened and Marcus, his personal assistant and only real friend, walked in with a clipboard and a professional expression that barely hid his curiosity. "The designer's here," Marcus announced. "Evelyn Blake. She's waiting in the conference room." Henry looked up. For weeks he'd put off hiring someone to redesign the company headquarters. Whitman Corp was expanding, and the corporate image needed to keep up. But he hated dealing with designers. They always wanted to change everything, question his choices, bring creative visions he hadn't asked for. "Is she any good?" Henry asked, more out of obligation than real interest. Marcus smiled. "The best. She's worked with Vanderbilt Industries, Sterling & Co., has an impeccable portfolio, and..." He paused deliberately. "She specifically asked to work on this project." Henry frowned. "Why?" "Don't know, but she seems determined." Determined. The word hung in the air like an omen. Henry sighed, adjusted his tie and stood up. "Let's get this over with." The conference room was a temple of corporate minimalism. Glass table, black leather chairs, pristine white walls decorated with soulless abstract art. The air conditioning hummed softly, keeping the temperature at exactly 70 degrees. And there, standing near the window, was her. Henry's world tilted. She wore a perfectly tailored grey suit, her hair pulled back in an elegant bun, thin-framed glasses he'd never seen her wear. Professional, distant, controlled. But it was her. Every curve, every movement, every breath. Ivy. His heart exploded in his chest. His hands clenched into involuntary fists. He felt the floor sway beneath his feet. She turned, and their eyes met. For a fraction of a second, a single infinitesimal moment, something passed between them. Recognition, pain, hunger. But then she smiled, a polite smile, distant, as if he were just another client. "Mr. Whitman," she said, her voice firm and professional, extending her hand. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you. I'm Evelyn Blake." Evelyn Blake. Not Ivy Harper. Not Ivy Whitman. Evelyn Blake. Henry froze. His brain tried to process the impossible. It was her. It was her. But she was pretending it wasn't. She was pretending she didn't know him, that she'd never slept in his arms, that she'd never promised to stay forever. Marcus cleared his throat behind him, and Henry realized he was staring. He shook her hand. Her skin was warm, soft, familiar. An electric current shot up his arm, and he saw her pupils dilate, just for a second, before she pulled her hand away. "The pleasure's mine, Ms. Blake," Henry responded, and hated how hoarse his voice sounded. She turned to the table, where a laptop and boards with samples were organized with military precision. "I've prepared some initial proposals based on the briefing your team sent me. The idea is to modernize without losing the essence of tradition that Whitman Corp represents." She spoke quickly, confidently. As if each word were a barrier between them, Henry sat down slowly, unable to look away. Every gesture of hers was a ghost from the past. The way she bit her lower lip when she was focused, how her fingers drummed on the table when she was thinking, how she tilted her head slightly to the left when analyzing something. How does she still affect me like this? "Mr. Whitman?" She called him, and there was a touch of impatience in her voice. "Sorry," he murmured. "Go on." She presented the proposals. Each one was perfect, sophisticated, bold, exactly what he needed. But he could barely pay attention. All he saw was her, Ivy, here, alive, real, and pretending he was a stranger. "What do you think?" she finally asked, her brown eyes meeting his for the first time since she'd started the presentation. "Perfect," he said, and he wasn't talking about the design. She blinked. The professional mask faltered, just for a second, but he saw it. He saw the girl he'd loved, the girl hiding behind that fake last name and that rigid posture. "Great," she replied, her voice slightly shaky. "Then we can start next week. I'll need access to all floors, especially your private office." "My office," Henry repeated, and there was something dangerous in his voice. "Yes, it's the heart of the company. It needs to reflect who you are, who I am. She knew exactly who he was, knew every scar, every demon, every secret. "You don't know me," he said, and it sounded like an accusation. Ivy, Evelyn, raised her chin. "I research all my clients, Mr. Whitman. I know more about you than you think." "I doubt that." The silence that followed was charged with electricity. Marcus, still near the door, looked uncomfortable, as if witnessing something too intimate for his corporate office. Ivy began packing up her materials, her movements quick and precise. "If there's nothing else, Dinner," Henry interrupted. She froze. "We need to discuss the project in detail. Dinner, tomorrow night." It wasn't a request. It was a trap, and they both knew it. Ivy stared at him. For a moment he saw anger in those eyes, then fear, then something he couldn't name. "That's unusual," she said carefully. "I'm an unusual man." She pressed her lips together. 8 o'clock. Send me the address. And left, without looking back, without hesitating. But Henry saw how her hands trembled as she held her purse, saw how she quickened her pace in the hallway, saw how she held her breath until she disappeared from view. Marcus whistled softly. "Do you know her?" Henry didn't answer, just stood there looking at the empty chair where she'd been sitting, smelling the vanilla and something floral she always wore. Ivy. She'd come back. But why? To torture him? To finish what they'd started? Or because maybe she couldn't forget either? He pulled out his phone and typed a message to his lawyer. "Need a copy of our marriage certificate. Urgent." The response came minutes later. "Divorce was never finalized. Technically, you're still married." Henry dropped the phone on the desk. Still married. He started laughing. A low laugh without humor, almost desperate. Ivy, his wife, his torture, his obsession, was back. And she had no idea he was about to discover the truth. Or maybe she knew. Maybe this was exactly what she wanted. The game had just begun. And this time, Henry had no intention of losing. The restaurant was too discreet to be accidental. Hidden on a side street in Tribeca, no sign on the door, just a golden number, 47, engraved in the frosted glass. The kind of place where billionaires' closed deals and extramarital affairs flourished under the protection of low lights and waiters who knew when to disappear. Ivy arrived exactly at 8 o'clock wearing a long-sleeved black dress that ended just above her knees. Simple, elegant, armor. Her heels clicked against the wooden floor as the maitre d' led her to a private table in the back, separated from the rest of the dining room by wine-colored velvet curtains. She felt Henry before she saw him, that magnetic presence that had always made her lose her breath. When the curtains opened, he was standing beside the table, hands in the pockets of perfectly tailored dress pants, white shirt open at the first button, no tie. His dark hair was slightly messy, as if he'd run his fingers through it several times. Their eyes met, and the world stopped again. "Evelyn," he said, and there was something dangerous in the way he pronounced that fake name. As if he were testing, provoking. "Mr. Whitman," she replied, keeping her voice steady as the maitre d' pulled out her chair. "Henry," he corrected, sitting across from her. "I think after you broke into my hotel suite, we can skip the formalities." Ivy froze. Her fingers, reaching for the linen napkin, stopped in midair. She raised her eyes slowly and found his smile, small, calculated, absolutely devastating. "I don't know what you're talking about," she lied, but even she heard the weakness in her voice. Henry leaned forward, elbows on the table, his face so close she could see the golden flecks in his gray eyes. "Lying doesn't suit you, Evelyn." The name again. That deliberate emphasis. He knows. Or suspects. "That night was a mistake," Ivy said coldly, picking up the menu even though she wasn't really seeing it. "A room mix-up. Nothing more." "Funny," Henry murmured, leaning back in his chair with predatory elegance. "Because I remember you saying you might be at the right time." Heat rose to her cheeks. Damn it. He remembered every word. Of course he did. The waiter appeared like a specter, pouring red wine into their glasses without either of them ordering. Henry didn't even look at him. His eyes remained fixed on Ivy, dissecting her, unraveling her. "Should we order?" she suggested, desperate to break that suffocating tension. "I already ordered for both of us," Henry replied simply. "I hope you still like lamb with mint sauce." Her heart sank. He remembers. It was her favorite dish, always had been. She'd ordered it the first time they had dinner together 5 years ago, when he was just an ambitious man trying to impress her, and she was just a beginning designer trying not to fall in love. "How did you—" she started, but stopped. She couldn't ask, not without revealing everything. "Intuition," he said with a half-smile. "Or maybe memory." Ivy picked up her wineglass and drank generously, needing something to calm her nerves. The liquid was rich, full-bodied, with notes of cherry and oak. Too expensive, like everything in his life. "So," Henry continued, his voice too casual to be sincere, "tell me about yourself, Evelyn Blake. Where did you come from? What's your story?" Ivy set the glass down harder than she intended. "My resume is available online, Mr. Whitman." Henry, she repeated through clenched teeth. "Resume don't tell me what I want to know." "And what do you want to know?" He leaned forward again, and this time his knee brushed against hers under the table. Ivy held her breath. The touch was brief, almost accidental, but sent waves of heat through her entire body. "Why did you run that night?" he asked quietly, and there was no game in his voice now, just something raw, real. "I didn't run. You did, after almost kissing me, after looking at me like—" He stopped, his jaw tightening. "Like you knew me." "Because I do know you," she wanted to scream. "Because I know every inch of you, because you were mine, and I was yours." "You're imagining things," she said, but her voice trembled. Henry laughed, a deep sound without humor. "I imagine a lot of things, Evelyn. I imagine what it would be like to really kiss you. I imagine how your skin would look marked under my fingers. I imagine you saying my name the way I know you want to say it." The air left her lungs. The room spun. He was playing dirty, crossing all the lines, and the worst part? She wanted to let him cross them. "This is inappropriate," she whispered. "I know." He didn't sound the least bit sorry. Dinner arrived, perfectly plated dishes, delicious aromas she barely registered. They ate in silence, but it was the kind of silence loaded with unspoken things. Every bite, every sip of wine, every stolen glance. Ivy tried to focus on the food, but all she felt was him. The intensity of his gaze, the way his fingers held the glass, the memory of those same hands on her skin years ago, in a time that seemed like another life. "Why did you take this project?" Henry asked suddenly, wiping his mouth with the napkin. Ivy hesitated. "Because I needed to see you again. Because 3 years weren't enough to forget you. Because I'm masochistic enough to want to be near you, even if it destroys me. Because it's an important job," she answered mechanically. "Good for my portfolio." "Lie." She clenched her fists under the table. "You don't know me well enough to know when I'm lying." "Don't I?" He tilted his head, studying her like a puzzle. "Then why, every time you lie, do you twist that ring on your middle finger?" Her eyes dropped to her hand, and there it was, a simple silver ring she'd worn for years, and her fingers, betraying her, were spinning it unconsciously. "Damn it. It's just a habit," she murmured. "Habits reveal truths," Henry countered. "Just like looks. Like the way you tremble when I'm close, like—" "Stop." The word came out like a plea. Henry stopped, but only physically. His eyes continued speaking, saying all the things his mouth couldn't. They finished the meal in tense silence. When the waiter brought the check, Henry didn't even look, just placed a black card on the tray. "I'm taking you home," he said, not as a question. "I can get a taxi." "I am taking you." There was something definitive in his tone, something that didn't accept refusal. They left together, New York's night air cold against their skin, warmed by wine and tension. His car, a black Aston Martin, was parked in front of the restaurant, waiting like an elegant beast. Henry opened the passenger door for her. Ivy got in, the smell of leather and masculine cologne enveloping her like a physical memory. He got in on the other side, started the engine, a deep purr that vibrated through the seats, and pulled into the night. Manhattan glittered around them, neon lights reflecting off skyscrapers, People rushing along sidewalks, taxis honking, life happening while they existed in that suspended bubble. "Where to?" Henry asked, his voice low. Ivy gave an address in Brooklyn, far enough that the drive would take time, too much time to stay silent, too much time not to feel his presence filling every inch of the space. They crossed the Brooklyn Bridge, the city spreading below them like an ocean of light. Henry drove with one hand on the wheel, the other resting on the gear shift, dangerously close to her thigh. "You've changed," he said suddenly. "People change. You're also the same." Ivy turned her head to look at him. His profile was illuminated by passing lights. Strong, defined, impossible to ignore. "You're speaking in riddles," she said. "You're living one." He was right. She was a riddle, a walking lie. A woman who was two at once, Ivy and Evelyn, wife and stranger, past and present colliding in ways neither of them knew how to control. The car stopped in front of her building, a red brick structure with fire escapes on the sides. She prepared to get out, but Henry gently grabbed her wrist. "Wait," he said. She looked at his hand on her skin. The touch burned. "What?" Henry turned toward her, his eyes traveling over her face as if trying to memorize every detail. "I need to know." "Know what?" "If this is real. If you're real. Or if I'm going crazy." Ivy felt tears threaten but held them back. She pulled her wrist back, opening the door. "Good night, Henry." And she left. Climbed the steps without looking back. Opened the building door. Disappeared. But behind her, Henry remained in the car, hands gripped on the steering wheel, heart beating like a war drum. Because he knew. He didn't know how or why, but he knew. That woman was more than she seemed, and he wouldn't rest until he uncovered the truth. Morning came with a grey cold light, typical of November in New York. Ivy woke with her body aching, as if she'd fought a battle in her sleep. In fact, she had. Against memories, against Henry's scent still clinging to her skin, against the phantom sensation of his fingers on her wrist. She made coffee too strong and stood at the apartment window, watching Brooklyn wake up. Kids running to the school bus stop, street vendors opening their stands. Normal life. The life she'd tried to build away from him. But Henry was back, or rather, she'd come back to him. And now she was trapped in a web of her own making. Her phone buzzed. A message from Marcus, Henry's assistant. "Need to get measurements of the private office today. Henry will be out until 3 p.m. Access granted." Ivy read the message 3 times. Henry will be out. An opportunity or a trap. She replied, "I'll be there at 10 a.m. Whitman Corp occupied 16 floors of a glass and steel building in the heart of Manhattan. The lobby was all white marble and gold details, opulent without being excessive, exactly like Henry had always been. The smell of expensive coffee came from the corporate cafe on the ground floor, mixed with expensive perfumes and colognes of executives rushing past. Ivy presented her temporary ID to security, who escorted her to the private elevator that went directly to the 16th floor, Henry's territory. The doors opened to a silent hallway with thick carpet that muffled any sound. Gunmetal grey walls, abstract paintings, everything controlled, everything perfect, everything his. Henry's secretary, a middle-aged woman with designer glasses and a professional smile, greeted her. "Ms. Blake, welcome. Mr. Whitman left the office open for you. If you need anything, I'll be at my desk." "Thank you," Ivy murmured, feeling her stomach turn. She pushed the double mahogany doors and entered. Henry's office was exactly as she remembered, and completely different. The enormous desk still dominated the space, positioned facing windows that offered a panoramic view of Manhattan. The shelves were still filled with business books and corporate trophies. But there was something new, something that made her heart tighten. On the shelf behind the desk, between a CEO of the Year award and a photo of him on a magazine cover, there was a picture frame turned face down. Ivy shouldn't. She knew she shouldn't, but her feet carried her there. Her hands turned the picture frame over. And there they were, 3 years younger, 3 years happier. Henry with his arm around her, both laughing at the camera on a beach in Montauk. She wore a white summer dress, her hair loose in the wind. He wore just a light shirt and rolled-up pants, bare feet in the sand. She remembered that day. It had been their 1-year anniversary. Henry had taken time off, something extremely rare, and they'd escaped to the beach. They'd made love with the windows open, listening to the sound of the waves, ate lobster with their hands, danced barefoot on the deck to Frank Sinatra. "Promise we'll have this forever," she'd whispered that night, her head on his chest. Forever, he'd promised. Lies. All lies. Ivy put the picture frame back, turned down again. Her hands were shaking. Why did he still keep this? Why hold on to a photo of a woman he believed had abandoned him? She needed to get out of there, needed to do her job and leave before... You shouldn't go through other people's things. Ivy spun around. Her heart stopped. Henry was leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed, face unreadable. He wore a dark grey suit, tie slightly loosened. And his eyes, those damn eyes, pierced her with an intensity that sucked all the air from the room. I thought you'd be out until 3, she stammered. I changed my mind. He entered the office, closing the door behind him with a soft click that sounded like a sentence. Something told me I should come back. He walked toward her slowly, each step measured, predatory. Ivy backed up until her back hit the bookshelf. You looked at the photo, he said. It wasn't a question. I didn't. Don't lie. He stopped inches from her, so close she could see the flecks of green in his grey eyes, so close she could feel the heat from his body. You always touch your hair when you lie, and you just did it. Ivy dropped the hand that had unconsciously gone behind her ear. Damn it. Who is she? Henry asked quietly, picking up the picture frame without taking his eyes off Ivy. The girl in the photo? How would I know? Ivy whispered. Because you look at this photo like you're looking at a ghost. He turned the picture frame, looking at the image. She left 3 years ago, left me without explanation, without a word, as if I meant nothing. The pain in his voice was palpable, real, and it destroyed Ivy. Maybe she had her reasons, Ivy managed to say. What reasons justify disappearing from the life of someone who loved you? He placed the picture frame back on the shelf, but not turned down this time. He left the photo facing them, facing her. What reasons justify destroying someone and then just vanishing? Because you destroyed me first, Ivy wanted to scream. Because you chose everything but me. Because I became invisible in my own home. Because I couldn't breathe beside you anymore. But she said nothing, just stood there, cornered between him and the memories. She was everything to me, Henry continued, his voice hoarse. And I was an idiot who didn't realize it until it was too late. Ivy felt tears burning, but refused to let them fall. Why do you still keep the photo? Henry stared at her. Because I'm masochistic enough to want to remember my biggest mistake every day. The silence that followed was deafening. Ivy took a deep breath, trying to regain control. I need to take the measurements. No. What? You're not leaving here until you answer something for me. Henry took another step, eliminating the space between them. His hand rose, fingers lightly touching the side of her face. Why do you look at me like you know me? I don't... Why do you tremble when I'm near? His fingers slid along her jawline. Why do I feel like I've touched you before? Ivy closed her eyes, unable to face his intensity. You're imagining... I'm not. His voice was a hoarse whisper now, his mouth too close to hers. I know it sounds crazy. But since that night at the hotel, I can't stop thinking about you. I can't stop feeling like you're... He stopped, as if the words were impossible to say. Mine. Ivy's eyes opened, and what she saw in them destroyed her. Confusion, desire, recognition. Henry, she began, but didn't know how to finish. Tell me I'm crazy, he begged, his forehead resting against hers. Tell me there's nothing here, that this is all in my head. But she couldn't, because there was everything there. Years of love, years of pain, years of them. I can't, she whispered. And then he kissed her. It wasn't gentle, it wasn't controlled, it was hunger, desperation, years of separation exploding in a single moment. His hands went to her face, holding her as if she might disappear. His mouth moved against hers with an urgency that took all the air from her lungs, and Ivy, God help her, kissed him back. Her hands grabbed the lapel of his jacket, pulling him closer. She opened her mouth to him, tasting coffee and mint and Henry. All her defense systems crumbled. All the walls she'd carefully built over 3 years turned to dust. Henry pressed her against the bookshelf, books trembling behind her. One of his hands slid to her waist, fingers tightening as if he needed to confirm she was real. "Ivy," he groaned against her lips, and the world stopped. Ivy froze. Her eyes widened. Henry pulled back abruptly as if he'd been shocked. His breathing was ragged, eyes wild. What did I say?" he whispered. But he knew. The second the name left his mouth, he knew. Ivy was in a panic, her heart hammering so loud she was sure he could hear it. She pushed him gently, creating space, creating distance. "I need to go," she said, her voice breaking. "No." Henry grabbed her arm. "No, wait, Your name is Ivy, isn't it? Your real name." The tears finally fell. "Let me go. Please." And there was so much pain in his voice. "Please, just tell me the truth." Ivy looked at him, at the man she'd loved, at the man she still loved, at the man who was beginning to unravel the whole secret she'd tried to keep hidden. "I can't," she whispered. "Not yet." And she broke free, grabbed her purse and ran out of the office, leaving Henry alone with the memories and the growing certainty that the woman he desperately wanted was the same one he'd lost years ago. And when he finally turned back to the bookshelf, he saw something she'd dropped on the floor, a temporary corporate ID, with her photo, and in the lower corner, almost invisible, legal name, Ivy Whitman. His legs gave out. He fell to his knees, holding the card with trembling hands. Whitman, she'd never changed her last name, and he'd been kissing, wanting, chasing. His own wife. 3 days. 3 days since Ivy had fled Henry's office. 3 days ignoring his calls, his messages, the formal emails from Marcus requesting urgent meetings about the project. 3 days hiding in her Brooklyn apartment, trying to figure out how to fix the disaster she'd created. But the universe had other plans. "Seattle?" Ivy repeated on the phone, her voice loaded with disbelief. "Yes," Marcus responded from the other end, professional as always. "Mr. Whitman needs to attend an investors' conference there. 3 days. And he insists you come along to evaluate the branch office we're planning to redesign. That doesn't make sense. I can do that later, remotely. It's non-negotiable, Ms. Blake. The flight leaves tomorrow at 7 a.m., first class. All expenses paid. I'll email you the details." The call ended before she could protest. Ivy threw the phone on the couch and buried her face in her hands. Seattle. 3 days. With Henry. She was doomed. JFK Airport was chaotic as always. Crowds rushing, announcements echoing through speakers, the smell of coffee and fast food permeating the air. Ivy arrived with just a small suitcase and a knot in her stomach that tightened with each second. Henry was waiting for her in the first-class lounge, sitting in a leather armchair scrolling through a tablet. He wore dark jeans, a grey button-down shirt, and a leather jacket that made him look less CEO and more human, dangerously accessible. When he looked up and saw her, something passed across his face. Relief, anger, hunger. "You came," he said simply, standing up. "I didn't have a choice," Ivy replied, keeping a safe distance. "There's always a choice." He took a step toward her. "You could have refused, quit the project, disappeared again." The accusation hung in the air like smoke. "Henry?" "Ivy," he corrected, and hearing her real name on his lips was like a punch to the chest. She looked around. The lounge was full of executives and business travelers. This wasn't the place for that conversation. "Not here," she whispered. Henry studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "On the plane, then." The flight was a nightmare of 5.5 hours of silent tension. They had private seats side by side, luxury pods with dividers that could be opened or closed. Henry kept the divider open, an invitation, or a threat. Ivy tried to focus on her laptop, reviewing floor plans and fabric samples, but felt the weight of his gaze every second. "You're not going to ignore me for 5 hours, Henry finally said, closing his own laptop. "I'm working. You're running." He turned his seat completely toward her. "Like you always did." Ivy slammed the laptop shut. You don't know anything about me. I know everything about you, Ivy. The way he said her name was intimate, possessive. I know you drink coffee with 2 spoons of sugar and no milk. I know you touch your hair when you're nervous. I know you have a scar on your left knee from falling off your bike when you were 9. I know you cry watching dog commercials. I know... Stop. Her voice broke. Why? Why do I have to stop talking about my wife? The word dropped like a bomb. Some nearby passengers glanced over discreetly. Ivy felt her blood freeze. How did you... Henry pulled something from his pocket, a folded paper. He unfolded it and placed it on the small table between them. A marriage certificate, hers and his, signed 3 years ago. Never annulled. You lied to me, he said quietly, but there was a storm in his eyes. You came back, pretended not to know me, made me want you like a stranger. And the whole time, you were my wife. I'm not yours anymore, Ivy shot back, but the words sounded hollow even to her. Legally, you're still my wife. Legally, we're still married. Papers don't mean anything, don't they? Henry leaned in, invading her space. Then why did you come back? Why did you take this project? Why did you kiss me? You kissed me first. And you kissed me back. His eyes bore into hers. You kissed me like you still loved me. Tears threatened, but Ivy held them back. You lost the right to talk about love 3 years ago. Then explain it to me. Make me understand why you left. Because I was dying. The confession exploded from her before she could stop it. Because I became invisible in our own home. Because you chose the company every single time. Because I loved you so much I was losing myself in the process. The silence that followed was deafening. Henry looked like he'd been stabbed. You never told me. I tried, but you weren't there to listen. The pain on his face was unbearable to watch. He leaned back in his seat, running his hands over his face. I didn't know, he whispered. Because you didn't want to know. It was easier to pretend everything was fine. Nothing was fine, Henry said, his voice hoarse. Nothing's been fine since you left. Ivy turned her face, looking out the window at the clouds. It doesn't matter anymore. It matters, he insisted. It matters because you're still here. It matters because you still use my last name. It matters because when I kissed you, you kissed me back like the last 3 years never happened. She had no answer for that, because it was true, all true. The rest of the flight passed in heavy silence. When they landed in Seattle, rain was falling hard, a typical Pacific Northwest storm. The sky was charcoal gray, and the air smelled of wet pine and sea salt. The hotel was discreet and elegant, a boutique hotel in the heart of Seattle overlooking Puget Sound. Ivy checked in at reception and received a key card. Room 504, the receptionist said with a professional smile. Henry checked in right after. Room 504, the receptionist repeated, handing him a key card. Ivy froze. Wait, what? The receptionist checked the computer, confused. It looks like there was an error in the reservation, but the hotel is completely full due to the conference. Room 504 is a suite with 2 beds. It's the best I can offer. No, Ivy said immediately. This isn't... It's fine, Henry interrupted, taking his key card. Thank you. He walked toward the elevators. Ivy ran after him. You can't be serious. I am. He pressed the elevator button. Unless you'd prefer to sleep in the lobby. I'd rather... I don't care what you'd rather, Ivy. We're sharing the room. End of discussion. The elevator doors opened. They entered in tense silence. The room was beautiful. Walls in shades of gray and navy blue, 2 queen-size beds separated by a nightstand, a huge window overlooking the stormy bay. It smelled of clean linen and something floral coming from a diffuser in the bathroom. Ivy dropped her suitcase on the floor. I'll sleep on the couch. No, you won't. You'll sleep in the bed like an adult. Henry, either I sleep on the couch or you sleep in the bed. Choose. Ivy stared at him. He was serious. Of course he was. Why are you doing this? She asked, too tired to fight. Because, Henry said softly, taking off his jacket, we have 3 years of unspoken conversations, and you're not running away this time. Night fell quickly. They ordered room service, sandwiches they barely touched, wine that Ivy drank too quickly. The tension in the room was palpable, like electricity before a storm. Around midnight, Ivy lay down fully dressed on one of the beds, her back to Henry. She heard his movements in the bathroom, water running, the sound of him brushing his teeth. Normal sounds. Domestic. Frighteningly familiar. The light went out. She heard Henry lie down on the other bed, the mattress creaking slightly. Silence. Ivy tried to sleep, but her heart wouldn't slow down. And then, without warning, the tears came. Silent at first, then sobs she couldn't control. "Ivy?" Henry's voice cut through the darkness. "I'm fine," she lied, but her voice was broken. She heard the sheets move, soft footsteps on the carpet, and then her bed sank as Henry sat on the edge. "No," he said gently, "you're not." His hand touched her shoulder. Just that. A light touch. But it was enough to break all the defenses she had left. Ivy turned, and before she could stop herself, he pulled her into his arms. She buried her face in his chest and cried, 3 years of pain, loneliness, regret, pouring out all at once. Henry said nothing, just held her, one hand stroking her hair, the other firm on her back. Anchored, safe. "I missed you," he whispered against the top of her head. "Every damn day, Ivy. I missed you." "Me too," she confessed through tears. "Even when I hated you, even when I tried to forget you." They stayed like that for hours, tangled in the bed in the dark, rediscovering the comfort of each other's arms. And when Ivy finally fell asleep, it was in Henry's arms, where she'd always belonged. Morning in Seattle was born covered in thick fog. The sound of seagulls echoed in the distance, mixed with the soft noise of rain hitting the windows. Ivy woke slowly, her senses returning one at a time. First the smell of fresh coffee, then the warmth of a nearby body, finally the devastating realization of where she was. In Henry's arms. She was lying on her side, her back against his chest, one of his arms heavy across her waist. His breathing was slow and deep against her neck, still asleep. For a moment, just one moment, she allowed herself to stay there, to feel safe, to feel home. But reality came like cold water. Ivy carefully untangled herself, getting out of bed without waking him. Henry murmured something unintelligible and turned on his side, his face relaxed in sleep. He looked younger like this, more like the man she'd fallen in love with, before ambition and pride destroyed them. She grabbed clean clothes and locked herself in the bathroom. The shower was hot and strong, steam filling the marble space. Ivy stood under the stream too long, trying to wash away the feeling of his arms, his scent clinging to her skin. But it was useless. Henry was under her skin. Always had been. When she came out, wrapped in a white hotel robe, Henry was awake, sitting on the edge of the bed with a cup of coffee in his hands. He wore only sweatpants, his bare torso revealing the defined muscles she knew so well, and some new scars she didn't. "Good morning," he said, his voice rough with sleep. "Good morning," Ivy murmured, avoiding looking directly at him. "I slept better than I have in 3 years," Henry said simply, and there was something vulnerable in his admission. Ivy didn't respond, just grabbed clothes from her suitcase and went back to the bathroom to get dressed. The day was a sequence of formal meetings and awkward silences. Henry had appointments with investors, and Ivy visited the branch office to evaluate the space. They barely spoke, but each other's presence was inescapable. Stolen glances across conference rooms, the palpable tension when they passed each other in hallways. That evening, Henry had a gala dinner at the hotel. Mandatory, and as his official design consultant, Ivy also needed to attend. She chose an emerald green silk dress that hugged her curves and ended just above her knees. Simple, but devastating. She let her hair down in soft waves and applied light makeup. When she looked in the mirror, she saw the woman she used to be, confident, beautiful, alive. Henry was waiting in the lobby, adjusting the cuffs of his impeccable white shirt under a black tuxedo. When he looked up and saw her coming down the stairs, everything stopped. His eyes traveled over every inch of her, slowly, deliberately, as if memorizing. When they finally met hers, there was fire there, "You look stunning," he said, and the words seemed inadequate for what his eyes were saying. "Thank you," Ivy replied, feeling heat rise up her neck. He offered his arm. She hesitated just a second before accepting. The ballroom was packed with executives in tuxedos and women in expensive dresses. Crystal chandeliers hung from the high ceiling, bathing everything in golden light. A band played smooth jazz in the corner, and the smell of expensive perfumes mixed with champagne and gourmet canapes. Henry guided her through the crowd, introducing her as Evelyn Blake, my design consultant. But the way his hand remained on the small of her back said something else. The way he kept her close, possessive, protective, said mine. They pretended, smiled for investors, made empty conversation, toasted with champagne that neither of them really wanted. But the tension between them grew with each minute. Around 10, when most guests were already affected by alcohol and the band was playing something slower, Henry turned to her. "Dance with me," he said. "Henry, I don't..." "Dance with me, Ivy." It wasn't a request. He led her to the dance floor, pulling her into his arms before she could protest. One hand on her waist, the other holding her hand against his chest, so close she could feel his heart beating, fast, erratic, alive. The music was slow, seductive. "The way you look tonight." A cruel irony from the universe. They moved together with an ease born from years of mutual knowledge. Their bodies remembered what their minds tried to forget. "You still dance well," Henry murmured against her hair. "So do you," Ivy whispered. He spun her gently, pulling her even closer when she returned. Now there was no space between them. None. Just heat and desire and memories. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Doing what?" "Torturing me, driving me crazy." Henry tilted his head, his lips close to her ear. "Because you leave me in peace and chaos at the same time." Her words, from the night in the hotel suite. He remembered everything. "Henry," she began, but had no words. The music changed to something even more intimate. Other couples left the floor, but they remained, trapped in their own orbit. Henry pulled back just enough to look into her eyes. "You left me," he said quietly. "But you never really left, did you? Because I always felt you. In every empty room. In every woman who wasn't you, in every lonely night." "You left me first," Ivy countered, but her voice failed. "You chose everything but me." "I know." And there was so much pain in his words. "And I'd pay any price to go back, to do it differently." "We can't go back." "No," he agreed, stopping dancing. They were motionless now, in the middle of the floor, oblivious to the world around them. "But we can start over." Ivy shook her head. "It's too complicated." Complicated is living without you." His hand rose, fingers tracing the line of her jaw. "Complicated is having you this close and pretending you're not mine." "I'm not anymore." "You are." His eyes burned into hers. "You always were. Always will be." And then he kissed her. There, in the middle of the dance floor, with executives and investors around, with the world watching. But Ivy didn't care. Her arms went around his neck, pulling him closer. His mouth moved against hers with desperate urgency, as if he'd waited a lifetime for that moment. The kiss wasn't gentle. It was need, hunger, years of separation being corrected in stolen seconds. His hands tightened on her waist, fingers digging into the silk of the dress. She moaned softly and he deepened the kiss, his tongue meeting hers in a dance their bodies knew by muscle memory. When they finally separated, both were breathless. The ballroom continued moving around them, but it was as if they existed in a bubble, protected from the world by pure desire. "Let's go," Henry said, his voice hoarse. "Let's go," Ivy agreed, unable to deny what they both needed. The return to the room was a blur. Elevator, hallway, door locked behind them, and then it was just them, alone. No excuses, no retreat. Henry pressed her against the closed door, his mouth finding hers again in a kiss that took all the air from her lungs. His hands moved up the sides of her body, memorizing every curve through the thin silk. "Tell me you don't feel anything," he whispered against her lips, "and I'll stop right now." Ivy stared at him, wild grey eyes, chest rising and falling rapidly, every muscle tense with restraint. She said nothing, just pulled him back into a kiss that was answer enough. Henry groaned, his hands going to the buttons of his own shirt, but Ivy pushed his fingers away. "Let me," she whispered. She unbuttoned his shirt slowly, one button at a time, revealing the tanned skin and muscles she knew so well. When the shirt fell to the floor, her hands explored his torso, fingers tracing the lines that memory still held. Henry closed his eyes, breathing ragged. "Ivy, shh," she murmured, her lips finding the base of his neck, kissing the path to his shoulder. He turned her around, his hands finding the zipper of her dress. He lowered it with torturous slowness, fingers caressing the exposed skin as he revealed more and more. The dress fell in a pool of silk at her feet. Ivy turned to him, wearing only black lace lingerie. His eyes darkened. "You're so beautiful it hurts to look." He picked her up effortlessly, walking to the nearest bed. He laid her down gently, his body covering hers, the weight familiar and comforting. "I dreamed of this," Henry confessed against her neck, his lips leaving a trail of fire. "Every night for 3 years." "Me too," Ivy admitted, her hands running over his back, nails scratching lightly. They moved together like a symphony, slow, deliberate, each touch a note in a composition only they knew. Henry kissed every inch of exposed skin, rediscovering her, reclaiming her. When they finally came together, it was with an intensity that destroyed and rebuilt them both at the same time. Ivy arched against him, fingers digging into his shoulders, his name a mantra on her lips. Henry buried his face in her neck, movements deep and measured, trying to memorize every second. "I never stopped loving you," he confessed, his voice broken. "Never, Ivy." Tears streamed from the corners of her eyes. "Me neither. Me neither, Henry." Afterward, when they both lay entwined between tangled sheets, sweat cooling on their skin, breathing still irregular, Henry pulled her against his chest. His fingers drew lazy patterns on her arm, from shoulder to wrist and back. "I'm not letting you go again," he whispered in the darkness. Ivy didn't respond, just pressed her fingers against his hand, interlacing them, because this time she wasn't sure she could leave, even if she wanted to. Henry couldn't sleep. It was 4 in the morning, and Ivy was sound asleep beside him, her naked body pressed against his, one leg intertwined with his. Her breathing was soft and rhythmic, lips slightly parted. She looked at peace for the first time since coming back into his life. But Henry's mind was at war. Something didn't add up. Evelyn Blake had appeared out of nowhere, accepting a project that designers of her caliber normally would refuse. She knew details about him that no online research would reveal. The way she moved, spoke, existed, everything was too familiar to be coincidence. And that ID card she'd dropped, Ivy Whitman, she'd never changed her last name. 3 years apart, and she still carried his name like a scar or a promise. Carefully, Henry slid out of bed, making sure not to wake her. Ivy murmured something unintelligible, but didn't wake, just curled deeper into the sheets, searching for the warmth he'd left behind. Henry put on his pants and grabbed his laptop. He sat in the armchair near the window, the blue light from the screen illuminating his face in the darkness of the room. He started with the marriage certificate his lawyer had sent. He studied every detail as if he could find answers between the lines. Ivy Harper and Henry Whitman, June 15th, 2022, New York. Her signature, delicate, with elaborate loops in the I and H. He ran his finger over the digitalized image, memorizing every curve. Then he searched Evelyn Blake Designer. Hundreds of results, an impeccable professional website, impressive portfolio, awards, industry recognition. But when he dug deeper, public records, academic history, anything from before 3 years ago, nothing. Evelyn Blake had appeared like a ghost exactly 3 years ago. The same month Ivy had disappeared. His heart raced. He opened a new tab and typed something he'd been putting off. Ivy's name, Ivy Harper Whitman. Old files appeared, photos from corporate events where she'd been by his side, smiling, radiant, his, articles about their wedding in society magazines, an interview where she talked about balancing her emerging design career with supporting his dreams. "Henry is my priority," she'd told the reporter, His success is our success. Henry felt his chest tighten. He remembered that period, remembered how Ivy always put his dreams above hers, how she smiled when he came home late, how she never complained when he cancelled plans last minute. He'd thought she understood, that she was happy, but she'd been dying inside. And he'd been too blind, too selfish to see it. He kept digging, searching for any mention of Ivy after the separation, and then he found something. A legal name change record. Ivy Harper Whitman to Evelyn Ivy Blake. She'd kept Ivy as her middle name, as if she couldn't completely erase who she was. And Blake. He looked up the meaning. Pale, without color. A perfectly melancholic description of how she must have felt after leaving. Henry closed his eyes, the physical pain in his chest making it hard to breathe. She'd rebuilt her entire identity, created a new person from scratch. Evelyn Blake was who Ivy had become when Henry Whitman destroyed her. He opened her project files, the design she'd presented for Whitman Corp. He studied every detail with new eyes, and then he saw it, in the subtle corners, in the color choices, in the small touches that no one else would notice. She was telling a story, their story. The design for the main lobby used shades of deep blue and gold, the colors of the dress she'd worn at their wedding. The light fixtures she'd suggested were identical to the ones they'd had in their first apartment together. The abstract art she'd chosen for the conference room. Henry pulled up an old image on his phone. It was almost identical to a painting they'd bought together at an art fair in their first year of marriage. She was leaving pieces of herself, pieces of them, throughout the company, like secret messages that only he could decipher. Why? Why would she do this? He looked at the bed where Ivy slept, wrapped in white sheets, her hair spread on the pillow like dark silk, and suddenly he understood. She hadn't come back for revenge, not to torture him, but because she also couldn't move on, because 3 years weren't enough to erase what they had, because she still loved him as desperately as he loved her, but she'd been afraid he'd reject her, afraid he wouldn't want her back. So she'd created a persona, transformed herself into someone he could want without the complications of the past. Except it hadn't worked, because he'd recognized her. Maybe not consciously at first, but his body knew, his heart knew. She never really left. Henry closed the laptop and sat there in the darkness, watching her sleep. When the first light of morning began streaming through the window, he finally returned to bed. He lay down beside her, carefully pulling her against his chest. Ivy murmured in her sleep, turning to nestle closer. "I know who you are," Henry whispered against her hair so quietly it was almost inaudible. "And I love you, all versions of you, Ivy, Evelyn, whoever you need to be." Ivy didn't wake, but in her sleep, her fingers found his, interlacing instinctively. When Ivy woke up, the sun was high and Henry wasn't beside her. Panic shot through her. He left, he regretted it. But then she heard water running in the bathroom and the smell of fresh coffee filling the room. She sat up, pulling the sheet to cover her naked body. The reality of the previous night crashed over her like a wave. What did I do? What did we do? The bathroom door opened, and Henry came out wearing only a towel low on his hips, wet hair falling over his forehead. Water droplets ran down his defined chest. He stopped when he saw her awake, an unreadable expression on his face. "Good morning," he said calmly. "Good morning," Ivy replied, her voice still hoarse from sleep. Henry walked toward her slowly, like someone approaching something fragile. He sat on the edge of the bed, his eyes studying every inch of her face. "We need to talk," he said. Her stomach dropped. Here it comes. He's going to say it was a mistake. "That I know everything," Henry interrupted gently. Ivy froze. "What?" "About Evelyn Blake, about the name change, about why you came back." He took her hand, interlacing their fingers. "I know, Ivy." Tears came instantly. "Henry, Shh, let me talk." He brought her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles. "You came back because you couldn't forget me. You created Evelyn Blake because you were afraid Henry Whitman wouldn't want Ivy back. And you left pieces of our history in the project because, even disguised, you couldn't completely hide who you were." Ivy sobbed, covering her mouth with her free hand. "How did you..." Because I know you. Every version of you. He wiped a tear from her face with his thumb. And you were right to be afraid, because the Henry from 3 years ago didn't deserve you. He was an idiot who put ambition above love, who didn't see when he was losing the only thing that really mattered. Henry? But this Henry? He placed her hand over his heart where it beat wild and erratic. This Henry spent 3 years in hell. This Henry learned, in the worst way possible, that no success matters if you're not there to share it. And this Henry is going to spend the rest of his life proving to you that you're the priority. Not the company, not the money, not the power. You. Ivy couldn't stop crying. 3 years of pain pouring out all at once. I still love you, she confessed through sobs. I tried not to love you, tried to move on, but I know. Henry pulled her into his arms, settling her on his lap. I love you too. Never stopped, not for a second. They stayed like that for a long time, holding each other, healing wounds with touch and closeness. So what happens now? Ivy finally asked, her voice muffled against his chest. Henry pulled back enough to look into her eyes. Now? Now we stop running, stop pretending, stop wasting time. What if it doesn't work? It will work. His conviction was absolute. Because this time we're both going to fight for it. I'm not letting the company consume me again, and you're not going to disappear when things get hard. How can you be so sure? Henry smiled, that crooked smile she loved, had always loved. Because you came back. You didn't have to. You could have gone on with your life, as Evelyn Blake, and never looked back. But you came back, because we're not finished, Ivy. We never were. She knew he was right. A part of her always knew she'd come back, that they couldn't just end that way. So we're officially... What? She asked. Married, Henry answered simply. We never stopped being. We just got lost along the way. But now, he pressed a kiss to her forehead. Now I've found you again, and I'm not letting go. Ivy finally smiled through her tears. Promise, I promise, with every part of me. And this time, she believed him. Because this time they weren't the same, they were older, wiser, more broken, and because of that stronger. And love wasn't about perfection. It was about choosing the same person every day, even after everything, especially after everything. The flight back to New York was completely different from the way there. Ivy and Henry sat side by side, fingers intertwined on the shared armrest, with no pretense of professionalism. She rested her head on his shoulder, and he traced lazy circles on the back of her hand with his thumb. What are we going to tell people? Ivy asked quietly, watching the clouds through the window. The truth, Henry answered simply. That your new designer is actually your wife who was pretending to be someone else? He laughed, a deep, genuine sound she hadn't heard in years. When you put it that way, it sounds crazy. Because it is crazy. The best kind of crazy in my life, he murmured, kissing the top of her head. But when they arrived in Manhattan, reality waited for them like a lurking animal. The next morning, Ivy arrived at Whitman Corp with her stomach in knots. She was still officially Evelyn Blake, hired for a project. But now she carried the weight of who she really was and what she and Henry had rebuilt in Seattle. Marcus greeted her at reception with a professional smile that didn't reach his eyes. Ms. Blake, Mr. Whitman asked that you go directly to his office. Ivy nodded, trying to ignore the curious looks from employees. The rumor must already be circulating, the CEO and the mysterious designer returning from Seattle with completely different energy. She knocked on Henry's door before entering. "Come in," his voice called from inside. Ivy pushed the door open and froze. Henry was standing near the window, his back to her, hands in the pockets of his dress pants. But he wasn't alone. An elegant blonde woman wearing an impeccable red suit was sitting in one of the leather armchairs, scrolling through a tablet. The woman looked up when Ivy entered, and a cold smile curved her perfectly painted lips. "So this is the famous Evelyn Blake," she said, her voice sweet as poisoned honey. Henry turned, and something passed across his face when he saw Ivy. Concern. Warning. Ivy. "This is Victoria Ashford. She's Vice President of Operations," Victoria interrupted, standing and extending her hand, "and an old friend of Henry's." Ivy shook her hand, feeling the coldness of the perfectly manicured fingers. "It's a pleasure. The pleasure's all mine. I've heard so much about you. Victoria tilted her head, green eyes studying Ivy from top to bottom, cataloguing every detail. Although I find it strange that Henry didn't mention he was hiring someone so involved in the project. The word involved hung in the air, loaded with insinuation. Victoria, Henry said, his voice taking on a warning tone. What? I'm just making an observation. Victoria smiled, but there was no warmth there. After all, it's not every day the CEO shuts down the company for a 3-day trip with an outside consultant. Ivy felt her blood boil. It was a business trip. Of course it was, Victoria agreed, but her eyes said otherwise. Anyway, I just came to check if you finalized the Seattle contracts. We have investors waiting. Everything's already signed, Henry said firmly, walking to the desk and picking up a folder. Here. Victoria took the folder, but her eyes remained on Ivy. You know, Henry used to be so focused, ruthless in business, but lately, she paused dramatically, he seems distracted. Victoria, it's been a pleasure as always, but I have a meeting with Ivy now, Henry said, clearly ending the conversation. Victoria smiled, that shark smile, and walked to the door, but she stopped beside Ivy, leaning in slightly. A piece of advice from woman to woman, she whispered, low enough that only Ivy could hear. Be careful. Henry has a habit of leaving women behind when something more important comes along. Ask his last wife. And she left, the sound of her high heels echoing down the hallway like gunshots. Ivy stood paralyzed, fists clenched at her sides. Henry was beside her in seconds, hands on her shoulders, turning her to face him. Don't listen to her. She's not wrong, Ivy said quietly. Yes, she is. He held her face, forcing her to look at him. I hurt you, Ivy. I made terrible mistakes, but I learned. And I'm never going to put anything above you again. How can I be sure? Because I'm going to prove it to you every day starting now. He released her and walked to the desk, picking up the phone. Marcus, cancel my afternoon meetings, all of them. Henry, you don't have to. Yes, I do. He hung up and came back to her. We're getting out of here. We're going to have lunch. We're going to talk. We're going to do what we should have done 3 years ago. Ivy felt tears threatening. What about the project? What about... It can wait. You can't. He took her hand, interlacing their fingers. So, will you come with me? She looked into those grey eyes, so full of hope, determination, love. Yes, she whispered. I will. They didn't go to a fancy restaurant. Instead, Henry took her to a small cafe in Brooklyn, hidden on a side street she used to frequent when they were younger. You remembered, Ivy said, surprised, when he stopped in front of the establishment. I remember everything, Ivy, every place, every moment. He opened the door for her, especially the good ones. The cafe smelled of fresh bread and roasted coffee. It was cozy, with exposed brick walls and worn wooden tables. Indie music played softly in the background. Just a few people scattered around, absorbed in books or laptops. They sat in a secluded corner, ordering sandwiches and coffee that neither of them really wanted. What they needed was to talk. Really talk. Tell me, Henry said, leaning forward, elbows on the table. Tell me everything. The last 3 years, what you did, how you survived, everything. Ivy took a deep breath. At first it was horrible. I rented a tiny studio in Queens, spent the savings I'd set aside. Cried for weeks. Henry squeezed her hand on the table. But then I realized I needed to reinvent myself. I couldn't be Ivy Whitman anymore, the wife who disappeared. So I created Evelyn Blake, changed my hair, changed my style, built a portfolio from scratch, taking small projects until I got bigger clients. Why Evelyn? Ivy smiled sadly. It was my grandmother's middle name. She was strong, independent, a survivor, everything I needed to be. And Blake? It means pale, without color. That's how I felt without you. Henry closed his eyes, the pain visible. Ivy. But it worked. Evelyn Blake became successful, recognized, and for a while, I believed I could move on. She paused. But then I saw the ad for Whitman Corp looking for a designer, and something in me couldn't resist. You wanted to see me again. I needed to see you. even if from a distance, even if you didn't recognize me." She laughed without humor. "What a joke, right? I built this whole persona just to be near you again. It's not a joke, it's love." Henry stood up, walked around the table, and knelt beside her chair, taking both her hands. "It's the kind of love that survives everything. That doesn't accept endings. That insists on continuing even when it seems impossible." Tears streamed down her face. "I was so afraid you'd reject me, that you'd moved on. I tried. I dated other women. Tried to forget. But nothing came close to you." He pressed his forehead against their intertwined hands. "You ruined me for anyone else, Ivy Whitman." "Good," she said with a trembling smile, "because you ruined me too." They went back to Henry's apartment, a huge penthouse in the Upper East Side that Ivy knew well. It had been theirs, for a while. But now it was different, colder, less personal, as if Henry had erased all traces of her after she left. "I couldn't look at the things that were ours," he explained, following her gaze around the empty rooms. "So I stored everything, in storage, waiting for you to come back." Ivy turned to him, her heart tightening. "Henry." He walked toward her slowly, predatory, until he cornered her against the living room wall. His hands landed on either side of her head, trapping her. "I want you back," he said, his voice hoarse. "Not as a consultant, not as a designer, as my wife, for real, every day, every night." "I'm here," Ivy whispered. "No. You still have one foot out the door. You still have that apartment in Brooklyn. You still sign as Evelyn Blake." His eyes burned into hers. "I want everything. I want you moving back here. I want to wake up with you every day. I want the world knowing you're mine. People will talk. Let them talk." He leaned in, lips brushing her ear. "I don't care about anything but you." Ivy trembled, her hands rising to grab his shirt. "Prove it." Henry didn't need any more invitation. He kissed her with wild hunger, lifting her off the ground. Her legs wrapped around his waist instinctively as he carried her down the hallway, their mouths never separating. They reached the bedroom that had once been theirs, and Henry laid her on the bed with reverence. "I'm going to love you until you have no doubts," he promised, pulling her blouse over her head. "Until you forget you ever left." And he kept his promise, with every touch, with every kiss, with every whisper of adoration against her skin. When they finally came together, it was different from Seattle. Slower, more intense, as if they were sealing a pact. "Stay," Henry begged, buried deep inside her, their foreheads pressed together. "Please, Ivy, stay with me." "I'll stay," she promised between moans. "I'll stay. Always." And this time, they both knew it was true. The rain began to fall in the late afternoon, transforming Manhattan into a blurred painting of lights and shadows. The drops beat against the floor-to-ceiling windows of Henry's penthouse, creating a hypnotic melody that isolated the world outside. Ivy stood in the living room, watching the city through the glass, wearing only one of Henry's dress shirts that reached mid-thigh. The cotton fabric still held his scent, cedarwood, something citrus and pure masculinity. She hugged herself, feeling the weight of the last few weeks, the revelations, the raw emotions that had been exposed. 3 years. 3 years of loneliness, of building walls, of pretending she could breathe without him, and now she was back. In his apartment, wearing his shirt, being his again. "What are you thinking about?" Henry's voice came from behind, deep and smooth as velvet. Ivy turned. He was leaning against the bedroom doorframe, wearing only black sweatpants hanging low on his hips. His bare torso revealed defined muscles, the dim light creating shadows that accentuated every line. His hair was messy, as if he'd run his hands through it several times. He was devastating, and he was hers. "About how we got here," she said softly. Henry pushed off the wall and walked toward her, with that natural confidence that always unraveled her from the inside. He stopped so close she had to tilt her head to look into his eyes. "We got here because we were stupid enough to lose each other," he said, his fingers finding the top button of the shirt she wore, "and lucky enough to find each other again." He unbuttoned the first button. Slowly, deliberately, Ivy's heart raced. "Henry, I spent 3 years dreaming about you, he continued, unbuttoning the second button, revealing her skin inch by inch. 3 years imagining what it would be like to touch you again, to have you again. Third button, fourth. But my imagination didn't even come close to reality. Fifth button. The shirt opened, revealing she wore nothing underneath. Henry's eyes darkened, his breathing getting heavier. He slid his hands inside the shirt, warm fingers against her cool skin, opening the fabric completely before letting it fall to the floor. Ivy stood naked before him, exposed not just physically, but emotionally, vulnerable in a way she hadn't been in years. "You're so beautiful it hurts," Henry whispered, his hands tracing the outline of her shoulders, down her arms, until he held her hands. "I forgot how much it hurt to look at you." He interlaced their fingers and brought her hands to his lips, kissing each knuckle, each fingertip, as if it was sacred. "Henry," Ivy whispered, trembling not from cold, but from pure need. "Tell me," he murmured against her skin. "Tell me what you want." "You," she confessed without hesitation. "Just you. Always you." Something wild passed through his eyes. In one fluid motion he picked her up, and her legs wrapped around his waist instinctively. His mouth found hers in a kiss that was fire and need, and years of longing condensed into a single moment. Henry carried her back to the bedroom, but didn't go to the bed. Instead, he pressed her against the wall beside the window, the coolness of the glass contrasting with the heat of his body. "I'm going to love you slowly," he promised against her lips, his hands holding her thighs, keeping her suspended. "I'm going to memorize every inch of you." And he kept his word. His mouth descended down her neck, teeth scraping lightly, tongue soothing each small hurt. Ivy threw her head back, hitting softly against the window, fingers burying themselves in his hair. He kissed the base of her throat, where her racing pulse betrayed every emotion, descended to her collarbone, nibbling gently before soothing with soft kisses. "Henry," she moaned, nails scratching his shoulders. "I know, love," he murmured against her skin. "I know." But he didn't speed up. He continued his torturous exploration, his mouth descending through the valley between her breasts, paying equal attention to each one, as if rediscovering sacred territory. Ivy was losing her sanity. Each touch ignited nerve endings. Each kiss left invisible marks she knew she'd carry forever. Henry finally carried her to the bed, laying her down with reverence between black silk sheets. The city light came through the window, creating silver patterns on her skin. He stood beside the bed for a moment, just looking, memorizing. "Why did you stop?" Ivy asked, breathless. "Because I want to remember this moment. You. Here. Mine." He leaned in, fingers tracing a line from the center of her chest, down her stomach, stopping just above where she needed him most. "Finally mine again." "I was always yours," Ivy whispered. "I know. But now," he positioned himself over her, the weight of his body anchor and promise. "Now you know it too." When they finally came together, it was with torturous slowness. Henry held her gaze, watching every nuance of pleasure that passed across her face, every caught breath, every tremor. "Look at me," he commanded when her eyes began to close. "I want to see you. I want you to see me." Ivy obeyed, drowning in those grey eyes she knew so well. She saw love there, adoration, possessiveness. They moved together in a rhythm that was muscle memory and simultaneous discovery. Each thrust was measured, deep, designed to take her to the edge and keep her there. "Henry, I need," Ivy begged, nails digging into his back. "I know what you need," he whispered against her ear, voice hoarse with restraint. "And I'm going to give it to you. But not yet. Not yet." He changed the angle and Ivy arched off the bed. A scream caught in her throat. Henry took advantage of the moment to capture a nipple between his lips, sucking, nibbling, until she was trembling uncontrollably. "Please," she cried, lost in sensations. "Tell me you love me," Henry asked, rising to look into her eyes, movements never stopping. "Tell me you're never leaving again." "I love you," Ivy swore, tears streaming from the corners of her eyes. "I love you so much, and I'll never, never leave again. Promise. I promise. With everything I am." Something broke inside him. The control he'd been maintaining with such effort shattered. He accelerated, each thrust deeper, more urgent, taking them both to the precipice. "Come with me," Henry begged, forehead pressed to hers, their bodies completely synchronized. "Come with me, love." And she did, exploding in waves of pleasure so intense she lost track of where she ended and he began. Henry followed seconds later, his body tensing, her name a hoarse cry torn from his chest. They collapsed together, breathing ragged, hearts beating in unison. Henry rolled to the side but didn't let her go, pulling her to lie on his chest. His fingers drew lazy patterns on her arms, from shoulders to wrists and back, over and over. "I'll never get tired of this," he murmured against her hair. "Of what?" Ivy asked, drowsy, safe, complete. "Of you, like this. In my arms, where you should always be." Ivy pressed a kiss over his heart, feeling the strong, steady beats beneath her lips. "I never want to lose this again." Henry held her tighter, as if he could fuse her to him through sheer force of will. "You won't, because I won't let you. No matter what happens, no matter what challenges come, we're going to fight. Together." "Together," Ivy repeated, the word sounding like a vow. They stayed like that for hours, tangled in messy sheets, the rain still beating against the window, creating a cocoon that was theirs alone. And for the first time in 3 years, they both slept completely at peace. Because finally, they were where they belonged, in each other's arms. Home. 6 weeks later, Ivy woke up with a strange feeling in her stomach. It wasn't pain, it was something different. A subtle discomfort that made her frown while still half asleep. She was back in the penthouse permanently now. The boxes with her belongings from Brooklyn were scattered around the living room, being unpacked gradually as they rebuilt not just their relationship, but their life. Henry had kept his promise. He cancelled meetings to have lunch with her. He came home before 7 every night. He asked about her day, really listened. And Ivy? She'd learned to ask for what she needed, to say when she felt neglected, not to hold on to resentments until they exploded into deadly silences. They weren't perfect. They argued. They faced difficult days, but now they fought together instead of against each other. Ivy sat up in bed, her hand instinctively going to her stomach. The nausea came in a sudden wave and she ran to the bathroom. When she finished, she sat on the cold marble floor, her back against the bathtub, heart racing. It can't be. But she knew. Deeply, instinctively, she knew. Henry found her there 10 minutes later, still sitting on the floor, knees hugged to her chest. "Ivy?" He knelt beside her immediately, hands on her shoulders. "What happened? Are you sick?" She looked up at him, and he saw something in her brown eyes. Fear, hope, uncertainty. "I need to buy something from the pharmacy," she said quietly. Henry frowned. "Medicine, I can—" "A pregnancy test." The world stopped. Henry's heart froze in his chest, then exploded into irregular beats. He stayed completely still, processing the words. You think you're—" Ivy nodded slowly. "I don't know for sure. But the signs— I know my body, Henry." He said nothing for a long moment, just stared at her, a storm of emotions passing across his face. Shock, fear, and then something that made her heart melt. Hope. "I'll get it," he said, standing abruptly. "Right now." "Henry, you have meetings." "Screw the meetings." He was already grabbing his jacket. Nothing is more important than this." He rushed out, leaving Ivy alone with her own thoughts. A baby. She could be carrying a baby. Their baby. 3 years ago, they'd talked about having children. It was a someday, a vague plan for when the company was stable, when they had time, when life was less chaotic. But then everything fell apart before someday came. And now they'd barely found each other again. They were still fixing cracks, rebuilding foundations. It was too soon. Too soon. But a part of her, the part that had never stopped loving Henry, that had always dreamed of a family, that part was singing. Henry returned in record time, carrying a pharmacy bag with at least 5 different tests. "I didn't know which was best," he explained, dumping everything on the bathroom counter, "so I bought them all." Despite her nervousness, Ivy laughed. "Henry, just do it." He held her face between his hands, grey eyes intense. "Please, I need to know." Ivy nodded, picking up one of the tests. "Give me 5 minutes." She locked herself in the bathroom, hands shaking as she opened the package. She followed the instructions mechanically, then placed the test on the sink and started the countdown. 3 minutes. The longest 3 minutes of her life. She sat on the edge of the bathtub, watching the test as if she could make the result appear faster, just by force of will. What if it's positive? What if we're not ready? What if Henry changes his mind about us? What if... Beep. The phone timer. Ivy took a deep breath and looked. 2 lines, clear, unmistakable, positive. Her legs gave out. She sat down heavily, hand going to her mouth, tears filling her eyes. A baby. She was pregnant, carrying Henry's child. The urgent knocking on the door startled her. "Ivy? What does it say? Please open the door." With trembling hands, she unlocked it. Henry burst in, eyes immediately searching for the test on the sink. He picked it up with almost religious reverence, and when he saw the result, something happened to him. His face crumbled, not from sadness, but from pure and absolute emotion. It's positive," he whispered, his voice breaking. Ivy nodded, unable to speak. Henry dropped the test and pulled her into his arms, holding her so tight she could barely breathe. She felt his shoulders tremble and realized with shock that he was crying. "Henry," she murmured against his chest. He pulled back just enough to look into her eyes, tears streaming freely down his face. "You're pregnant. You're carrying our baby. I know it's too soon. I know we're still—" "It's perfect," he interrupted, hands holding her face. "You're perfect. This is perfect. Are you sure? Because if you're not ready—" "Ivy Whitman, are you listening to me?" He knelt down in front of her, hands going to her still flat stomach. "I spent 3 years without you. 3 years in hell wishing for a second chance. And now I not only have you back, but we're going to have a baby." He pressed his forehead against her stomach, shoulders shaking. "I'm ready," he whispered. "More than ready. I'm not asking for a second chance. I'm begging for a life with you. And now—" He looked up, and the love there was devastating. "Now we're going to have a family." Ivy collapsed, falling to her knees to be at the same level as him. They held each other there on the bathroom floor, crying tears of joy, fear, hope, and absolute love. The following weeks were a whirlwind. Medical appointments, prenatal vitamins. Henry obsessively researching pregnancy, reading books, asking endless questions to doctors. He became protective in a way that was adorable and sometimes exasperating. He wouldn't let Ivy carry anything heavy. He insisted she rest more. He even hired a private chef to ensure she ate balanced meals. "Henry, I'm pregnant, not disabled," she complained one day when he tried to stop her from climbing stairs. "I know, but you're carrying the most precious thing in the world, our baby. So forgive me if I want to take care of both of you." How could she argue with that? The news eventually spread through the office. Marcus was the first to know, almost fainting from shock when Henry casually announced he was expecting a child with Evelyn Blake, who was actually Ivy Whitman. His wife everyone thought he'd divorced. The confusion was epic, but Henry didn't care about the looks, the whispers, the speculation. He simply held Ivy's hand in public, introducing her as my wife with a fierce pride that left no room for doubt. Victoria Ashford tried to cause trouble, insinuating that Ivy had set everything up to trap Henry. But Henry dealt with it quickly, making it clear in a board meeting that any disrespect toward Ivy would be considered disrespect to him and wouldn't be tolerated. Victoria resigned 2 weeks later. 6 months after discovering the pregnancy, Henry planned something special. "Where are we going?" Ivy asked as he led her blindfolded out of the car. "You'll see," he said, his voice loaded with barely contained emotion. When he removed the blindfold, Ivy caught her breath. They were back at the beach in Montauk, the same place where they'd celebrated their first wedding anniversary. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Rose petals formed a path in the sand, leading to a simple arch decorated with white flowers. And there, waiting with a warm smile, was an officiant. "Henry," Ivy whispered, hand going to her prominent 6-month belly. "We got married once out of social obligation," Henry said softly, taking her hands, "for family expectations, because it was what was expected." He guided her down the path of petals to the arch. "But today I want to marry you by choice, because you're my best friend, my greatest love, the mother of my child." His hands trembled. "Because I choose you. Today. Tomorrow. Always." Tears streamed down Ivy's face freely. "You didn't have to." "I did. We did. A real new beginning. Real vows, said by real people who know exactly what they're getting into." The officiant smiled. "Are you ready?" Ivy looked at Henry, at the man who'd lost her and fought to get her back, at the man who'd learned, changed, grown. "Yes," she whispered. "I am." The vows were simple. No pomp, just raw, honest promises. "I promise to put you first," Henry swore, voice steady despite the tears. "I promise to listen when you speak. I promise to fight for us, not against. I promise to be the man you deserve, every day, for the rest of my life." "I promise not to run when it gets hard," Ivy swore back. "I promise to communicate instead of holding back. I promise to remind you that you're more than your work. I promise to build a life with you, not just exist beside you." When they kissed, it was with the sound of waves in the background and the feeling that finally they were truly beginning. 3 months later, on a winter night in New York, Ivy gave birth to a healthy baby girl weighing 7 pounds, 12 ounces. Henry was by her side the whole time, holding her hand, whispering encouragement, crying when the baby's first cry filled the room. When they placed their daughter in Ivy's arms, they both fell silent, watching the miracle they'd created. "She's perfect," Henry whispered, finger tracing the tiny cheek. "She's ours," Ivy replied, heart so full it hurt. "What should we call her?" Henry asked. Ivy smiled. "Hope. Because she's exactly that. Our hope. Our second chance. Our redemption." Henry kissed Ivy's forehead, then their daughter's. "Hope Whitman. Perfect." Months later, on a sunny Saturday, Henry found Ivy in the garden of their new home, a house on the outskirts of New York, with space for Hope to grow. She was sitting on the grass, Hope in her lap, playing with the baby's tiny fingers. The wedding rings, the original and the new intertwined, sparkled on her hand in the sun. Henry sat beside them, putting his arm around Ivy, pulling his family close. "I'm still your wife," Ivy said with a smile, echoing words from long ago. Henry kissed the top of her head. "And now, the woman of my life, the mother of my daughter, my partner, my everything." Ivy rested her head on his shoulder, watching Hope yawn sleepily. And for the first time in their lives, they both understood the true meaning of home. It wasn't a place. It wasn't walls or addresses. It was this moment, these hearts beating together, this family. Sometimes love needs to break apart to be rebuilt the right way. Henry and Ivy learned that second chances don't come wrapped in perfection. They come covered in scars, painful truths, and the courage to choose again. They lost each other not because love ended, but because they forgot to fight for it. And when fate brought them back together, disguised from one another, they proved that some souls are destined to find each other, no matter how many names they take on or how many miles separate them. In the end, it wasn't the past that saved them. It was their willingness to build a different future, together. And maybe that's the greatest lesson of all. True love isn't about never falling. It's about getting up hand in hand every single time. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and become a member for early access to upcoming stories. And if you felt it was truly worth listening to, hit the super thanks button too. Your support makes all the difference and helps us keep bringing stories that move you.